Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to Interviews That Result in Offers. My name is Lisa Reichert. I'm the Career and Professional Development Lead with People and Organization Development. I'm so excited that we're debuting this new series. This is the first year that we're offering this, and it's an extension of our Now conference that just happened in July. And I'm so thrilled to introduce our presenter, Kim Sapp Dinwiddie, who was one of our presenters at the Now conference in July. She presented on effective resumes, and she's a frequent presenter at our Now conferences. Kim has been at Berkeley for 19 years. Currently, she is the training manager in talent management and workforce planning at University Development and Alumni Relations. Formerly, she was a senior talent acquisition consultant and staff career development trainer in what was then Central HR, which is now People and Culture. And she's also developed and facilitated campus recruitment and hiring, training curriculum for campus managers and supervisors. Previously, she was a program director at UC Extension. Kim has been training, recruiting, and hiring, building career and job development curriculum, and managing related programs for 20 plus years. She has a master's in education counseling, and she has so much, great experience and expertise to share. So Kim, I will let you take it from here. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thanks so much, Lisa. That was an awesome introduction. I don't even need the second slide I'm about to show now. So welcome everybody. I'm really excited to do this Now Encore series. Number one, because it's a follow-up just a few months out after the initial Now conference that was scheduled in July. But also today, I don't know if you can see one another on the screen, but we have a small group. So that really enables us to have more like a standard classroom style discussion. If you can sort of envision yourself in person talking with me, I want to welcome you to ask questions along the way with any subject that we're covering, as well as at the end, of course. And there may be a subject you have a question about, and I defer you momentarily because I have coverage on that coming up. So just note that I will get to it, and I'll mention that along the way if that is the case. Otherwise, the best thing to do if you have a question is to be relevant to the content I'm going over at that time, because I will likely cover other topics. And if I don't, you'll have lots of room at the end to ask about that as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so Lisa did such a wonderful job of introducing me, which was greatly appreciated. And here's just a little snapshot of everything she said. But in that I've been at Berkeley for 19 years, my anniversary for my 19th year is November 1st, so just a few weeks away. And I've been in my current unit for 5.5 years. And then I was in Central HR, which is now People and Culture, as Lisa mentioned, for almost 9 years. And did a lot of staff development training, as well as my role as a senior talent acquisition consulting, hiring for lots of different levels, everything from, an AA2 to an ABC. So lots of hiring in that almost 9 years over there. And then my work at Extension also involved working with a lot of our Bay Area experts in the field of business and technology. So I have kind of an interesting spectrum of experience both at Berkeley and prior to my work at Berkeley in the tech industry and recruiting. So I look forward to answering your questions today. Okay, when we talk about becoming the candidate of choice and having an interview experience that results in a job offer, that's the goal of an interview. You want the job offer, because from that point forward, obviously, once you're offered the position, you have a lot of negotiating power. So your objective for a job interview is to get the offer. Your objective for a resume, of course, is to get the interview. So those steps obviously take place in tandem with one another. Today, we're going to talk about preparing for a job interview. We're going to talk about what happens during the job interview and how you should navigate that to be sort of optimally seen by the search committee in front of you. We know at Berkeley that it is not just one person ever interviewing a candidate. It is always a group of people who have a vested interest in whether you are the individual hired. We'll also be discussing job interview follow-up and the very pressing questions that happen each time I do this presentation around salary and offer negotiation. All right, so your job interviewing objective to become the candidate of choice is to sell yourself, and to sell yourself with strong, demonstrative information about your past work experience and how that applies to the job at hand. So becoming the candidate of choice means showing them you are the most qualified for that particular job. So really honing in on showcasing your interests, your knowledge, skills, and abilities through the series of Q&A that the panel has available to you and is required by law to ask all those same exact questions of any other candidate being considered for the role. So with that in mind, you really want to hone in on what you have done in your past experience and what examples you can promote that show a strong ideal correlation between your experience and background and what the stated job description and requirements have said. And the other thing that I really like to focus on in these sessions about job interviewing is to realize that most people in an interview feel like they're in the hot seat. They feel a lack of confidence because they know all eyes are on them, and there's a high amount of stress because they're being examined, so to speak. But I really like to emphasize here that in an interview situation, it's a 50-50 split, actually. You are being examined, but as should you be examining the employer, be examining the people that you're going to be working with, be examining the vested stakeholders who have an interest in hiring you, as should you have a vested interest in who are the people you're going to be working with. So it should really be a two-way assessment. And the more you can evaluate that in your own experience as an interviewee, it really settles the nerves a little bit, makes you more confident, and makes you evaluate your own interest in the role and the people you may end up choosing to work with. Because remember, when you're offered the job, you do have a choice whether to accept it or not. So it's really important to remember that other side of the coin. All right, when we look at employers' interview objective, we often want to think about the worries, the concerns, and once again, the vested interest they have in whether you are the person they offer the job to. And eventually, obviously, hire, hoping that you accept the position. So they want to know, can you actually do the job they are evaluating you to do? And can you work well with others on their team? The manager that will be designated for the position, and independently, of course. How will you fit into the organization, the culture, or the environment? And will you be engaged in the role? Will this be enabling you to have a little bit of growth potential? Or are you sometimes what people would call overqualified? They don't use that very often because it has some legal implications. However, are you experientially paired well with the match for the designated requirements and functions of the job at hand? Or are you well beyond that experientially and therefore maybe not the best fit in that respect? What do you bring to the table? What fresh perspectives and solutions do you have that could help them in the functions of the role that they will be stating what the challenges will entail? And knowing in advance how you can contribute to those challenges and answer questions about it, or add information at the very end of your interview that maybe they didn't even ask about, those can be some very valuable tidbits for you in securing yourself as the best candidate and the candidate of choice. All right, when we talk about preparing for the interview, obviously you want to do as much research as you can. You want to research the unit, if it's at Berkeley, obviously. You want to research the job description that you utilized when you put together your resume and your offer, or your cover letter. And you also want to look at the job interview scenario possibilities from the job description. And what I mean by that is, if you create a checklist from the job description, and you can essentially check off all the stated requirements of the job, and have demonstrable examples of work you've done in the past that is correlated directly to the types of responsibilities and functions that are defined in that job description, you create a matched up requirements to qualifications ratio that is favorable to that employer. And when you create a checklist for yourself, it also helps you prepare. It'll help you prepare for your interview, because you're going to look at, they're certainly going to want to ask you questions about all the things they say are going to be required for that job. So think about the things that you might be able to answer that show your demonstrated abilities to handle those descriptions and functions and the things that they know will be challenging for the role. The other thing to be conscientious of is that you always want to have a 2-minute introduction of who you are, what you've done, your career path, and what has essentially led you to sitting in that seat right then and there, being called a 2-minute introduction or sort of your elevator speech. But it's really, really important, because as we'll go into in detail when we talk about the kind of questions you're so often asked, you are generally always asked at Berkeley, why are you interested in this position, or tell me about yourself? And that 2-minute introduction is the answer to that question. So the more you can hone in on that 2-minute introduction or elevator speech as it pertains to the job that you are being considered for in that moment, the more effective you're going to be at answering that, especially first asked question, almost without question. Okay. PARS, awareness and preparation. We're going to go into what PARS means and how to prepare for interviews. And we're also going to talk about the questions that you should prepare once again in looking at that checklist. Any questions so far? Feel free to let me know if you do along the way. I don't have any problem being briefly interrupted. Okay. So let's talk about PARS. What do I mean by this? PARS is the method for interview preparation that stands for project, action, result, and summary. And it prepares you for behavioral-based interviewing. And why is this important? Well, it's important because 85% of the time, 85 to 90% of the time, the nature of the questions you are asked in interviews, both in the corporate world and in higher ed, and especially at Berkeley, is behavioral-based questions. These questions have the best capacity to relay your contribution and abilities to the employer about the job at hand. So if you are going to tell them about your past experiences that show a direct correlation to the ability to do this job over and over and over in the questions that are asked and answered by you, you create a pattern of showing over and over and over that you are the candidate of choice, that you are qualified to do that job, that you are going to be capable of handling the requirements of the position and the challenges of that position. So being able to reference a problem, project, or situation that's highly correlated to the position at hand and how you impacted that problem, project, or situation, as well as the outcome that was a result of your actions, and you summarize the three together, that is a sort of an award-winning answer in an interview question, right? It shows you have the capacity to do the job and the outcome that's going to occur when you take the nature of the actions that you take to handle those kinds of challenges or situations or problems. So it is really the most effective way to focus on preparing for a job interview. We talked about a moment ago the 2-minute introduction. Of course, tell me about yourself, or why are you interested? Why is this question so prevalent, and why is it almost always the very first one asked? Well, they immediately get a sense of your ability to relay information about yourself to them and set up your experience and how it fits the job at hand. So it talks about the relevance to the job and your experience, skills, focus on that rather than characteristics. You never want to hone in on your characteristics, but rather your skills and experience that are suited for the position. And why you're interested in the job. Of course, demonstrating how this is the next step in your career, how it allows you to pull from different experiences and jobs or projects and utilize all of those in this particular platform. That's really valuable because it shows that you're going to be able to open up your toolkit that you're bringing onto the job site, and you're going to have amazing tools to utilize to solve their problems. You also want to focus on the element of the career summary or the career path. You don't have to go through your whole resume, and in fact, you don't want to. But what you do want to do is talk about, for me, starting my career out as a career counselor at the University of Oregon is still very highly related to the nature of the work that I do today, both in the session that I'm meeting with you on right now, but also as a training and development manager. So it's very important for me to talk about the origin of my work and how it's related to all the other steps that I took along the way and the tools that are provided for any given job at hand. And that's the same thing you want to do. It doesn't mean you have to go back to the beginning if that work is not relevant. Maybe it's halfway through your career that you're doing things that are highly related to the nature of your work now. It's fine to just go back to the point in time that makes sense to convey about your demonstrated skills. Also focus on significant related accomplishments throughout your entire job interview. Obviously, when you highlight problems, projects, or situations, actions, and results, you are going to be doing this over and over and demonstrating your ability to handle the job that they're focused on. So let's look at what I mean by this when we think about an example of using PARS to prepare for an interview. So if we look at the problem or project, the P in PARS, you might have a situation where in this example, a person managed and maintained all records pertaining to purchasing and inventory. That was the problem or the project, or perhaps one of their primary functions on a regular basis. The action taken in handling that problem, project, or situation is to consolidate and computerize all records into one system. That's something that was done. The result in handling that problem or project or situation with that particular action was the development of a new tracking system, which reduced annual costs by 20%. If you put them together in a summary, those three components, and again, you're not necessarily taking them all and just piecing them together, you're creating a summary of the three, and that summary is, number one, a possible bullet on your resume, but number two, a way for you to convey the demonstrated experience that you have with results to show your capabilities to do the job at hand. So in this case, the summarized example is consolidated purchasing and inventory records management system resulting in 20% annual cost savings. So this combination is the summary that shows the PARS preparation for an interview. Not only does it help you obviously prepare a resume, but that resume preparation in turn in this three-part pairing and summary per descriptor helps create the ability for you to reference and recall the demonstrated examples of your experience to relay to the interview committee. The one thing I do get asked a lot here is, what do I do if my results are not necessarily quantitative? What if I don't have a 20% increase to relay or something that shows a numerical value in that result? And the answer is, it's not a problem. It's very common to both discuss quantitative results or numerical results like a 20% annual cost savings, as well as qualitative results. So maybe increased morale, but how did you find out that morale was increased? Those are kinds of things you would go through to describe qualitative results versus quantitative results. And they're both well regarded and important. Any questions so far? Okay. So when we look at why 85 to 90% of the questions you are asked in an interview situation, especially with a panel or a small group of people, why they are behavioral based is because past performance predicts future behavior, or in this case, future performance on the job that they are considering you for. So that's why so many questions and such a large percent are behavioral based in nature. And if many of you aren't necessarily aware of the pairing of what I'm saying, you're probably very familiar with the 3 or 5-part questions that you get at Berkeley, or probably got for the job you're sitting in now. So what happens is you're asked a question, but there's 3 parts to that question. And thank goodness most of the time you're offered to be reread the question a few times and are recommended to go ahead and take notes, so you are sure to capture the information they want from you in your answer. So in this example, tell me about a specific project you managed. Who were the stakeholders and what were their roles? Working backwards, what were the milestones? And did you miss a milestone? If so, what did you do in that situation when you missed the milestone? So this grouping of questions, they're calling one question. And the reason why they're calling it one question is because, believe it or not, that part that I specified earlier about PARS, the problem, the action, the result, the good news about behavioral based questions is they really set it up for you to convey each of those parts, the problem, the action, the results, and the summary, in the nature of these grouped questions. You can tell here from this, they're going to get all of that information, the PARS component of grouped information, by asking this multi-part question. Let's look at the next one. Tell me about a specific time when you had a disagreement with your boss or coworker. What was the situation and how did you handle it? How did the conflict get resolved? Would you do anything differently next time? Those are some of the things that you can pretty much rest assured are commonly asked and could be asked. So you want to be prepared to be able to reference times when there were conflicts and how you resolve those. They want to know about your problem solving skills. And of course, at Berkeley, the formal job description has one primary component that's all about not only the custom scope of the job, but the problem solving skills required to handle that particular classification level and position. And so they're going to be sure to ask you questions that are detailed and focused on the nature of the level of problems around that type of position. So prepare yourself with a PARS-oriented response. Okay, job interviewing scenario. What other kinds of questions are going to be asked in addition to that 85 to 90% of behavioral-based questions? Well, if there are technical components to the job, you will likely be asked at least 1 or 2 technical problem-oriented questions. Maybe you are not an IT professional, but maybe there is a particular skill as a project manager or as an analyst or as an administrative support person that they want you to be able to know, a specific skill that was cited in the job description. Be sure to be prepared to explain your experiential level with that technical skill to show that you're going to be well versed in handling it and be able to jump right into that job. Also, based on the nature of the position, you may be asked to present for a job interview. And even though we're on Zoom, it doesn't necessarily keep them from making this request of you and having you present via Zoom, because that's sort of the world we're living in for the next several months, right? So it may still be requested of you to prepare a 3 to 10 minute presentation. Who knows the nature of the job itself and what it may request, but be prepared to be able to do that. It's very rare you will be asked to present something on the spot. Usually they're kind enough to ask you to prepare that in advance. So know that that won't usually happen, that it will be put on you on the spot, but you may be asked in advance to come prepared to talk about a specific topic of your choice or have different parameters around it. Panel interviews are part of our life in higher ed, of course, at Berkeley. In my time recruiting at Berkeley and handling all different levels of searches, I had panels as small as 3 and as large as 15. So you may have any one of those numbers in between for the panels in your interview scenarios, and we'll certainly recall your last interview and how many people were on that panel, but I can tell you it's almost always a panel, and it is very seldom just one person. It doesn't mean you may not have a subsequent second interview with one person here and one person there, maybe one-on-one with the manager or one-on-one with somebody you'll partner with a lot, but your initial will almost always be a group of people who have a vested interest in the hire for this position. All right. Okay, during the interview, let's talk about the protocol that you should have and utilize during your interview, as well as styles and common interview questions. Behavioral interviewing, once again, we're going to talk a little bit about how to navigate that the best way possible, since it's often so loaded with multiple question per question. And let's talk about the follow-up questions that you should ask when they ask you, do you have any questions of us? And also the do's and don'ts of interviewing. Okay. Any questions before we get into this segment? Okay. So, styles of job interviewing. There are, believe it or not, a lot of different styles of questions and the kind of interviews people can experience. Behavioral-based interviews are, once again, the majority of the questions asked. However, these other types of questions are also asked. Closed-ended questions. Why did you leave your last job? There is a single answer to that question. Now, how you answer it is another thing, but the bottom line is they're looking for a very honed in on and specific answer from you, right? They're not leaving it open-ended like the next type of question, like tell me about yourself or tell me about your supervisory experience. Those kinds of questions are phrased in a very broad manner, and they allow for you to get very specific about the information you elect to share with them. Now, obviously, when you look at the job at hand, if there's a supervisory component, they're asking the question because you're going to be required to supervise someone. So you're obviously going to want to reference your own supervision and managerial experience as you believe it most demonstrates and pertains to the job at hand. It doesn't mean you're ever going to falsify information, but what you're going to do is you're going to be very strategic about the pairing of your experience with the job to demonstrate that matched up opportunity to show your contributions as an employee for that kind of role. Accomplishment questions. Tell me about your most recent job-related accomplishment. This question was something I was asked when I started at UDAR 5.5 years ago. And thank goodness I actually had a very big accomplishment that was cited at the time and could come up with it very, very quickly. But it could have thrown me a little bit and surprised me had I not thought about it relative to a recent accomplishment, because so much of what we do are everyday accomplishments, our natural function and job requirements that we do day in and day out. We have a hard time sometimes thinking of them as big accomplishments, when in fact they are. Closing out certain parts of projects, or making a big difference in a problem and conflict situation and creating a resolution. Those are also accomplishments. So think about it that way as well. Behavioral-based interviewing, we've covered the multi-part questions, problem or situation, and tell me about it, the actions that you took, and the results derived. More open-ended questions of tell me about yourself and tell me about your supervisory experience could also be questions that close out an interview. They may open with that and they may close with that. And those kinds of questions are also opportunities for you to share something that you wanted to share that they did not ask a specific question about. So think about it from that perspective as well. Case studies, situational-based questions. This is a very unique type of interviewing question, and it happens about 1 in every 12 questions. So if you're in a 1-hour interview, you're going to be asked about 8 to 9 questions. If you're in an hour-and-a-half interview, you're going to be asked about 12 to 13 questions. And case studies and situational-based questions are asked when The other kinds of questions do not allow in their mind the ability for you to demonstrate based on your experience how well you'll be prepared and able to do that job. So they want to get very specific when they ask these types of questions with the job at hand. So Joe is in ABC situation handling XYZ while LMNOP is happening. What would you do if you were Joe? So those kinds of questions are going to allow them to assess your critical thinking skills, your analytical skills, and your problem solving skills. And obviously how to recall on your feet a similar situation so that you can apply that in this particular case study. All right. So the other kind of questions that you want to prepare for that are fit within the stylistic elements of everything we just covered in terms of closed and open and case studies, etc., is your strengths, your weaknesses, your areas of growth, your people and team working skills, what managers and coworkers would say about you, something you have learned, a specific experience that's related to the demands of the job, and projects that did or did not go well. And obviously, over and over again, your successes. Now, I want to go back to an area here, the third bullet, areas of growth, because this tip was given to me, oh my gosh, probably 30 years ago, and I've never forgotten it. And it has stuck with me both in my own time interviewing for jobs, but also in educating people about how to really be strategic in interviewing for jobs. And that is this. When you're asked, what is your greatest weakness coming into this role? When you think about everything required for this job, what's going to be the toughest for you, do you think? What's going to be your weakness? And the thing that you always want to answer is never, ever, ever going to be related to your character, your traits, who you are as a person. Never should your answer be affiliated to those components. Instead, it should be related directly to an experiential component that you may be lacking, one part that may be lacking, or you don't have as much experience doing, but you have something that is a very transferable skill in which you know you'll be able to pick it up very quickly on the job. And so the reason for that is because people can't change who you are and your traits and your character flaws, perhaps, but they can change exposure to a new skill or a new program by providing you with the training to do that part of your job. So that's why focusing on an experiential element as a weakness is actually much more powerful than any reference to a trait, character trait or flaw in who you are as a person. Any questions?
Hi, Kim. We do have a question.
Sure.
From Barbara. If your biggest accomplishment isn't necessarily related to the job you are applying to, should you still share it or find a different way to relate it to the job at hand?
That's a good question. And one of the things that comes to my mind as I hear it is, sometimes people affiliate themselves with other things in life beyond their work, and that may be volunteer experience or something like that. And so if there is a skill that you have acquired and an ability that you've acquired that you can contribute to that role that's outside of perhaps your last job or something that you can easily convey from a direct work related experience, certainly don't hesitate to use it, because a skill is a skill. And if you can use it and contribute to making yourself and the organization and department successful by utilizing it, certainly relay it, even if it is volunteer based and not something you receive pay for. Does that answer the question, or is there any other part of that that would like to be discussed further?
Well, that answers it. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Great. Okay. So, follow-up questions that you should ask. What do you foresee as the priorities for the first 3 to 6 months for this role? When you are asked the question in an interview, okay, now it's your time to ask questions of us. Do you have any questions? you better never, ever, ever say, nope, I'm good. Because what you do is you tell them, I'm not interested in this. I'm not interested in you, and I don't want any part of this. That's what you sort of convey when you say, no, I don't have any questions. Think about this in advance. Believe it or not, the nature of the questions you ask tells them a ton about you. It may be that the question you ask has a strong research component. Maybe some of the research you've done leads you to have certain questions about the projects that you're going to be working on in the first 3 to 6 months. So asking what that will look like will also help turn the tables and let you see the challenges of this job for the next 3 to 6 months. Is that something you want to walk into? Let them tell you what this is going to look like for you. First 6 months, first year, whatever the case may be. Have them share that with you as well. And you might ask, what qualities are you looking for in a, whatever it may be, my last job in a training manager? What are the qualities you're looking for? And sometimes you may be emboldened to say, once they answer that, are there any qualities you see a need for that I'm lacking as a candidate? And then they may or may not share it with you. Sometimes those questions make them squirm a little bit, so you got to kind of have a read on the people that you're talking to, but those can be really helpful in getting a sense of how well you are matched and suited for the job based on everything you've shared with them up to that point. How would you describe your management style? This is a question I think is very important to ask the person who's going to be your manager or supervisor. I almost always ask it. I've regretted it when I have not asked it. So I recommend people ask it. Is this role vacant or a newly budgeted position? Anytime an organization is going through budgetary issues, this can be a very valuable question. Because if someone left a role and it is now open, you can also go as far as to ask, how long was the previous person in this role? What do you think were their greatest contributions? And that'll tell you what they're going to look for from you in that job. So that can be really, really valuable as you look to the nature of the questions you might want to ask. In what capacity would I be working with the XYZ initiative? This kind of question, once again, shares with them a little bit of the research you've done and you've learned about something happening in the unit or whatever. So those can be really valuable questions, and there's all sorts that you may want to ask, but some of the ones that are very logistics oriented that I always recommend be asked are things like, what does your interview timeline look like? Have you just started? Are you nearing the end? When do you expect to relay an offer to someone based on your selection? So that gives you a sense of whether or not you're the first person being interviewed or the last. And it also tells you, maybe you need to sit for a while and wait for the decision to be made. And it can also help you not be so anxious if they already are letting you know it's going to be a few weeks. So I always ask that question with regard to the follow-up questions when you're coming to the close or the end state of the interview.
Kim? Borsa has asked, are there specific questions we should ask if we are already working in the unit and are applying for a job that would be a promotion?
Oh, this is great. So if you're already in a unit and the job that you are interviewing for is either in a different, when I think of like UDAR, for example, there are multiple subunits. Excuse me. There are multiple subunits. And so it may be that you are working in a big organization and going to another unit, but if you're in the exact same unit, I think asking questions that are specific to what advanced skills will they be looking for that are different than something that you may be doing in your current role? And what things would they benefit from as an organization for you to jump into to train and prepare for if you're not currently holding that skill? So that can be a way to show you're eager to learn whatever it's going to take to do the job because the majority of what you have to offer is already available to them. So that can be very, very valuable. And also, if you're being promoted, then they already know that you have a strong skill package. So asking them what are going to be the projects you're going to need in this next role, this next level up, in my first next 6 months to a year in that next level up. It's related to the same questions we've already talked about, but it's going to tell you what they want from you at that next reclassification level. Anything else on that? Okay. So job interviews, do's and don'ts. Obviously, some of these are very logical and simple, but they're worth stating. Arrive 10 minutes early if it's in person. If it's not in person, make sure you're on Zoom 5 to 10 minutes before everybody else. And ask good follow-up questions about work-related issues. Once again, don't ever say you don't have questions. Make eye contact. So obviously, in an interview when you are in person, this tip will carry you very, very far. And that is this. In a panel interview question, let's say you have 8 people in the room and you're at the end of the table in the hot seat, and you are being asked a question by one person, but everybody in the room certainly wants to know the answer, not just the person who asked the question. When you are asked the question by the individual who initiates it, make eye contact with them. Begin your 3-part parse answer with the person who asked the question. Circulate the room, make eye contact with every single one of them, and then end with the person who asked the original question. Because everybody has a vested interest in the answer, but you're showing respect to the person who initiated and will close the answer with. So it can be really valuable and believe it or not, very, very strategic, because your nonverbal answers and information and what you're conveying are, believe it or not, percentage-wise, said to be even more important than your verbal answers. So that's a really strategic and effective element in interviewing. When Zoom is your platform instead of a panel interview group around a room, make sure that, for example, your bar of gallery image of your panelists are up near your camera so that you are looking as best as you can at the camera or the eye contact that it provides in that manner. Also, don't be afraid to circulate the images in front of you to make it look like you're addressing everybody and then go back to the camera at the end. It's the same concept, but you're going to utilize it differently, obviously, based on platform. Now, once again, ask about the hiring process. What are the next steps? How should you follow up, or will they be following up with you? It's worth doing so that it can put you at ease a little bit and make you aware of their timeline. Thank all the people who are interviewing you, whether it's in person or in Zoom, and simply ask for the business card or the email, in the case of Zoom, of the search committee chair. You do not have to send an email or send a follow-up letter to every single person on the committee. They will convey it to the committee members when the search committee chair receives it. So that's who you want to focus your communication with, is the search committee chair. Any questions about any of these strategies? Okay. Don't ask about salary and benefits in this initial job interview phase, of course. If you can help it at all, wait until the job offer is closed, because what happens is most of the time it becomes pretty uncomfortable for people to talk about until you know a lot more about what they want from you based on the nature of the questions that they've asked and what they convey to you when you ask your questions. That exchange of information helps set you up for better capacity to negotiate, because it sort of enables you to mentally go through that initial checklist you created when you went through your job description and be able to show them, yep, I have this requirement and responsibility. Yes, I've done this, and I've done this for 7 years, not just the 5 you've asked, and things like that. So that capacity to go through that exchange of questions and answers and wait till the end to talk about money allows you to reference that exchange when you go to negotiate. However, when we get to this topic, I will be talking to you about the strategy of how to handle it when they're asking you at the very front end during a phone screen before you even get the chance to do your quote unquote in-person exchange with the committee. So we'll get to that. Don't talk about vacations that are planned that you're going to take and, oh, I'm not going to be able to start for a month. I'm taking next month off. You don't want to go into that. Not yet. Discuss interviews with other organizations. Don't go into that either. However, they may ask you, are you interviewing with anyone else or anywhere else? And all you have to say is yes or no. Don't be afraid to say yes if the answer is yes, because believe it or not, if you're their candidate of choice, they're going to move more quickly in offering you the position if you are interviewing elsewhere. So it's actually really helpful to them and quite courteous. Talk about family members or personal issues. You don't want to go into anything like that. Obviously, people sometimes are personally guarded, even on the initial job for a few months until they get a chance to get to know people. But especially in the interview phase, you don't want to go into personal. You are there being evaluated for your ability to demonstrate your job capabilities to that employer and the fact that you're going to be able to do a stellar job for the position at hand. Don't badmouth the current or former employer. And I love this part, no matter how bad it was. We all have experiences that are bad from our professional career. At least I think most people do. If you don't, you're very fortunate and lucky. But most people have a bad coworker from the past or a bad boss or whatever the case is. You don't want to go into that. You want to talk about the things that are able to highlight your skills, your abilities, your analytical thinking, and your problem solving capabilities. And so, for example, even in the interview phase itself, when you are asked about a conflict with a boss or a coworker, you don't have to think of the worst one you ever had. Think of one that will allow you to show how you actually solved it. Think of the one that has the ability to show your problem solving skills and conflict resolution abilities. Any questions about do's and don'ts so far? Okay. When you follow up after the job interview, obviously in our remote world, you want to send an email and you want to add components of self-reflection. You don't just want to thank them for their time and evaluating you for the position. You want to reflect on maybe something unique that was asked that you want to highlight once again that you are well paired in handling based on your experience with X, Y, and Z or ABC. So you're not going to go into a long diatribe, but you may reference something that once again shows that match, shows that pairing, shows that you are the candidate of choice. And you're going to review general impressions of the job and the cultural fit and some of the language that you're providing in your thank you, and maybe some folks you met with and how you think you might work with them based on common experiences of your past positions and jobs to the new one, and how it fits with your skills, your values, and your goals, which were very heavily relayed in your interview, obviously. And then what aspects of the interview went well? What can you improve upon? This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to add this in the thank you letter, but after the job interview, you should do this for yourself to make sure that you can make improvements the next time around, especially if you don't get offered the job. And in any case, even if you do. All right. Any questions before we launch a poll, quick poll to ask you some questions about salary negotiation? All right. We'll go ahead and ask you a quick question to get your input. Please go ahead and ask if the last time you interviewed for a job at Berkeley, if you went ahead and negotiated your salary for the position, and no if you didn't. Great. Thank you. So based on what I see here, 64% of you negotiated your salary, and 36% of you did not. So there's a lot of reasons why you may or may not negotiate your salary. But I have to say, in the majority of cases, I am going to almost always recommend that you negotiate your salary when you're offered a job. And the reason why that initial checklist when preparing for your job interview is so important is because you're going to be able to reference how well you demonstrate your contributions and abilities to do that job from past experience. And the more you can check every box on your checklist as it pertains to the outlined job functions, roles, requirements, everything that's highlighted, everything that you can show you meet or exceed in those job requirements is negotiating power. It is really that simple. So when you meet or exceed, you're able to reflect on and show the employer, I match all of your requirements and actually exceed some of them. With that in mind, you're going to go into the details about how they match, and then you're going to propose your salary negotiating range. Okay. So with that, as I just said, always state a range. Don't just come back with a number. And the other thing I want to focus on here, in just a moment, I'm going to go in range. How do you select that $3,000 to $5,000 range to do that? And of course, it's related to your met requirements based on that job description and whether you meet or exceed them. But the one thing to really think about here is that you should be well aware of all your strengths, all your abilities to meet the job requirements, and any that you don't also be aware of before your interview, and simply be able to back it up with the exchanged questions and information from the interview itself. Okay. When you look at how well you meet the criteria for the job and how well your job experience and background demonstrates met or exceeded requirements for those responsibilities and handling those job functions, the university has how employees are sort of categorized or placed based on that experiential level in which they're coming into the job. Many of you are probably very familiar with the concept of the midpoint at Berkeley and the midpoint of the range, et cetera. The compensation ranges at Berkeley were built several years ago when the career compass mapping and planning was created about 8 years ago or so. This effort was done to tie labor market trends to the pretty broad compensation range of any given classification at Berkeley. So that broad range allows us to identify whether your experiential level demonstrates your capabilities within the first 25% of the range, the first quartile, whereby individuals are new to the grade and they do not have substantial experience in the area, or whether you are in the second quartile and you're an employee who's gained experience and skill and you're becoming more proficient in the position for which you're hired. These people with our past performance evaluation system on the campus would have often met expectations or of course, well done on reviews. And then people in the third quartile are generally experienced employees who frequently would have exceeds expectations or standouts on the next Achieve Together review that you're going to be all familiar with soon. Some of you are part of the pilots on the campus and may already be familiar with that, but the change in performance management to Berkeley is just simply changing the way we label our performance levels on campus. So with that being said, somebody often ends up in an offer and salary negotiation range of the second and third quartile most of the time. There's a few times entry-level positions and things like that where people do fall in the first quartile based on their experience. But the reason it's so important to learn about this quartile system is because it really helps you be able to convey to them, based on Berkeley's quartile residential compensation range system, as I understand it, not only do I meet my expectations on my performance reviews, but all my reviews have always been well done, or in fact, this last year I was a standout, or whatever the case may be. That's not possible yet because Achieve Together is just here, but maybe you exceeded expectations or were marked as exceptional. When you have those references to performance reviews, as well as demonstrated skills, abilities, background, projects that are related, lots of problem solving that's correlated to the challenges you're going to have in the next job, and you can show them the correlation between that experience, your performance reviews, and where you'd fall in the quartile, wherever they have offered you and wherever that falls, you can specify how there is potentially a discrepancy and you'd like to know, is there room to negotiate? This is the key question for salary and offer negotiation. You always want to ask after you're offered a job, well, thank you. I greatly appreciate that offer. I'm excited about the position. Based on reflection of our exchange over the interview and the questions you asked and the demonstrated experience I meet or exceed with regard to the job, I'd like to know if there's any room to discuss compensation negotiation. Is that a possibility? Then you stop talking. I know it's uncomfortable sometimes in that moment to ask that kind of question at all. But once you do ask, leave room, leave silence for them to say. Most of the time, the response I've always gotten is, what did you have in mind? Sometimes you'll get a, no, I'm sorry, it's not possible. This is set, there's no way of going around it. You can make your case, even when they say that, and see if they budge at all. But most of the time at Berkeley, that is pretty steadfast and true. When you're answered, what did you have in mind? You're gonna often get the ability to go ahead and make the case based on the factors that I just went through. When we look back at the answers to the questions that I gave you about my experience, about the demonstrated abilities that I have of corresponding to the projects that are upcoming for this position and the nature of my scope of work handling this. And once again, you're going to go through some of those bigger met items on your checklist of the job requirements and the responsibilities for the role. And you're going to reference those and talk about meeting and exceeding those and how your performance reviews would correspond to a potentially higher negotiation. Is there room to negotiate a compensation range of such and such to such and such? So let's say they're going to offer you $75,000 a year. And you know that $75,000 a year is right on the top edge of the first quartile and the bottom edge of the second quartile. But you know, you've always received well dones or standouts or meet expectations and exceeds expectations on your reviews. When you have the opportunity to negotiate and go through your checklist, show them your demonstrated abilities and how you've conveyed that in the interview, how you've met or exceeded, how you get perhaps even standout reviews based on that pairing of qualifications and where you're defined in the quartile residence of compensation range at Berkeley. It seems that, here's the key words here, a fair and equitable compensation might be such and such to such and such. And in this case, maybe it is they offered you 75, maybe you say 80 to 85, based on, once again, how all those elements seem to fit in the definition of your quartile residents and of how well you meet job requirements for the position. It's a little bit of an art. It's not a science. But the one thing I can tell you is you are going to do a better job of negotiating your salary if you extract all emotional elements out of the deal. What I mean there is you're not going to ask for the number you want. You're not going to ask for the number you think you deserve. You are going to ask for the number that is highly correlated to your job experience, how well you meet the requirements of the job or exceed them, and how that corresponds to your performance reviews and the stated definition of where you fit in the quartile system. Those components create a very logical sense. And when you use the terms, the question of, is there room to negotiate? You convey your case, and then you convey your range based on that stated case and all the rationale provided. They're going to be able to go back and examine it in that way. And I can tell you that you might not get what you want exactly. As again, once I said, not what you want per se, but what you have stated is fair and equitable based on met requirements for the job and performance history. But oftentimes, salary negotiation, if they've given you room to do it, will result in something a little bit more than what you were initially offered, especially if you make a non-emotional case for yourself. I shared this tip with somebody years ago when I was handling staff development training and career planning and development when I was working in central HR. And I had a gentleman go off and interview for a job, and I got this amazing email from him about a month later where his first title was, it worked, and he came back and he explained in his email to me how he really worked hard to extract the emotion and the elements of what he desired or what he thought he deserved. And he really honed in on the logics and how this was correlated. And he got $10,000 more than he was offered by doing that. So it may not always work exactly in that amount per se, but it will really show you have a strong ability to be politely assertive, to be able to convey the things that are important, and to show logic application to the way you are demonstrating your abilities to handle something. So it can be a really valuable process, and I just really highly recommend it. Now, what do you do if you're in a situation whereby they tell you, no, there really isn't? This is the top of the line for this compensation range. There's no opportunity to go any higher than that. What do you do in that situation? Well, you can let them know, I hear what you're saying, and I'm wondering if there's any opportunity for me to explain to you why I was interested in negotiating. Go ahead and state your case anyway. Let them know why it was valuable to you to convey the fair and equitable compensation that makes sense for this job as you fit into the requirements, responsibilities, and the demands of the position based on how well you meet them, how well you've demonstrated your ability to have handled them in the past, or transferable skills that will show your capacity to handle them in the future. So I highly recommend you do it, obviously in a very politely assertive way, extracting the emotion, focusing on the credibility of your demonstratable experience and where you seem to fit in the quartile residence. This is often an area where we have a lot of questions, so please feel free to ask questions if you have any.
What great tips, Kim, and we have a few comments. So Michael has shared, I appreciate the negotiation tips. Typically, I am so excited to get an offer and even feel some sort of guilt in asking for more, like I'm being greedy, but I always regret not negotiating. And that's one comment.
Okay, so What's that?
That's one comment, and then we have another. Do you want to
Okay.
that one?
Okay, I'll go ahead and respond to this one first, unless the other one's also related.
No.
What do you think, Lisa?
We'll break
Okay.
them up.
Okay, so I'm so grateful that whoever made that comment did so. I want to say that you are not alone in the notion of feeling, kind of like, shrinking in your seat a little bit with the guilt of having to even ask and how hard it is. So in our culture, first of all, go way back to your own upbringing or whatever the case, how you handled conversations about money or approach about money or any of those kinds of things absolutely impact how you sit in the chair of salary negotiation and what you want to ask and what you can and couldn't ask and shouldn't ask. And the tips I've given you today are really to help you focus on what to stay away from and what to hone in on, so that you extract your emotion, you don't focus on the want or the need or the desire, you focus on the relevant, what's appropriate, what's fair and equitable based on the met requirements to the job with your own background and experience. That is where you should sit in your comfort level to approach salary negotiation. It's really, really important that you advocate for yourself here, because this is the most critical thing to think about and one way to also extract the stress and the anxiety around it. When you are given compensation, whatever that allocation is in the end state, that money, that payment is for your skills. These employers are buying your skills. They're buying what you're bringing to the table. They're buying your contributions. They're buying what's going to make their life easier and their goals, their organization flourish. So think about it from that perspective, because when you're able to relay in your own mind, oh, I'm doing everything they need and then some, they're buying this from me. What price is that worth relative to the quartile residence and compensation range of my job classification level and my met or exceeding demonstrated skills that I bring to the job description and bring to the table of this position? Those kinds of things can really help you put it in a focus and sort of let the guilt sit on the back stool or table when you're in your seat to do the salary negotiation itself. What's the other comment, Lisa?
Thanks, Kim. We have one comment and two more questions. So I'll start with the comment and then we'll move later to the questions. So Betsy has shared with everybody, don't forget salaries are public record. It helps to look at what your counterparts are making on campus. So Kim, maybe for those that don't know about that, maybe you could give a brief overview of what that public record is and how to do that.
Yeah, so there is an ability to find out what people are making across campus in a given classification range. In fact, this is such an excellent tip. So thank you, Betsy, for providing it, because one of the things that employers do and the managers in the units at Berkeley do when they're coming up with an allocation for compensation, they do often look at the average compensation, the average of all the people who are handling, IT or in a specific position, maybe a systems analyst or whatever the case is. They often go and look at what are all the other systems analysts on the campus making at this classification level. And they'll often do the average of that for the baseline offer. That's something that does happen quite frequently, actually. And when you negotiate up above that, you're having to show them, well, not only do I meet, but I exceed that average. And this is the reason why, and why my experience is in a higher bracket and range than that average. So that's what your job is to do, is to convey that to them in demonstrating your match or exceeding that match. So going and looking at the, and maybe you can reflect, Lisa, for a moment, there is a specific website you can actually go to look at the people who sit in various classifications. And I don't know it right off the top of my head, but I do know it exists.
I've just added it in the chat. So everybody has the link to that website. And that is the public site that you can search salaries by campus, title, position. So it's
Yes.
chat.
Yes. And so, by the way, I want to mention here, because the comment is so valuable, that if you're sitting in a job right now and your skills are definitely meeting or exceeding those of the job you're being interviewed for, and in fact, you're actually underpaid pretty substantially for the job you're in now, it is not sort of against the rules to ask for the salary range that's relevant to the position you're looking to be hired for right now, even if it's quite a jump, because where you're at now, perhaps you're under where you should be based on the skills you're using. And you wouldn't be the only time or experience that's happened, right? So make sure you examine that and say, I realize this looks like a big jump, but don't even say that at all if they haven't asked you what your current salary is, even though they can look it up. Really hone in on the nature of the position itself and the why and how it pertains to the rationale, versus focusing on your current salary. Sometimes they'll ask what your current salary is. Sometimes they will go and look it up, or it doesn't reflect my current skill level or the skills of this other job that I'm being considered for. Instead, that range is more reflective of, and that's when you go into explaining the demonstrated skills, matching, residence, quartile, etc. Did you have a question, Lisa, from someone?
A few more questions. So
Okay.
Barbara asks, if they say they can't negotiate salary, then can you ask about other types of non-salary compensation that might be available?
Absolutely. Yes, you can. There's a lot less capacity for Berkeley to help in this way, in that, the benefit package, things like that. You get to select which plan you are on and things like that. But generally speaking, you are going to be offered the compensation and the benefit package that's relevant to that classification level. And it's pretty standard. And that's to enforce, the employment laws and the benefits that are allocated to the university and the positions and the classification levels, et cetera. So it's not like a corporate scenario whereby you can say, well, give me stock options, or give me more vacation leave, or things like that. That's pretty tough for them to negotiate because there is an equity issue involved. But you could certainly say, when we're not telecommuting anymore, you can, negotiate telecommute time, or negotiate your hours to be early. If you're an early bird, maybe 7 to 4 instead of, 8 to 5 or 9 to 5:30, or whatever the case may be.
Great. Thanks. So another question from Orsolia. In other classes I've taken before, it was always communicated that hiring managers offer a little less than what they actually have budgeted for. Is this not true?
That is hard to say, but generally speaking, they also have a range to work with. So it is absolutely always worth negotiating, not because of the numbers they have or that they're working from, but because of the numbers you are qualified to receive based on your demonstrable experience. So really focus on your case, your scenario, how well your background and skills are meeting that particular job and the expectations of that job, and focus in on that. Just know that it's always worth doing, and generally speaking, they have a range to work with just like you do.
All right, great. And one more question. So Michael says, I often feel like I'm sneaking when I interview for other jobs. I'm afraid my current boss will feel I've all but moved on. Do you have tips on how to be transparent and not give the impression that you want to leave, especially if you don't want to leave, but are just open to the next opportunity?
So this is a great question, and it has a lot of gray area, meaning there is no right or wrong way to navigate a situation like this. And it's important to remember that managers and supervisors have multiple ways of looking at this situation. many of them, if they're the kind we often want to work for, they are a proponent of your own career and professional growth, of your advancement for your own career, lifelong. There are managers and supervisors who have a mindset of that nature and welcome conversation, especially in this new performance management model, whereby you're going to be meeting with your manager and supervisor 3 times a year to talk about your goals, how it is aligned with the organization. Always will be encouraged to have you focus on a professional development goal annually, things like that. So this model sets up the opportunity for us to talk with our managers a little bit more about our goals, our career goals, not just the skills we want to acquire, but what we want to do long term. And talking to them about what kinds of things they recommend you do if your long-term goal, focus on the long-term goal rather than right now or this year or something like that, so that it's clear that they're helping you with your growth and, in essence, reminding them that helps them with the succession planning and the maintenance of institutional knowledge by keeping you here at Berkeley and utilizing your skills across the campus, and that you're really excited about maybe doing joint multi-unit projects or anything like that, that you're excited to work with other people, those kinds of things. You can set the stage of how to contribute to the organization, both from a micro approach from the unit in which you sit, as well as a macro approach in terms of the units that collaborate with other units on campus. And that's some of that kind of conversation can open the doors for that. But I'm not going to deny that there are managers out there who you do feel scared to mention you're going on to another job or considering something else because of worry around negative repercussions. And, sometimes there's a need to maintain a strategic approach and not let people know until the offer's already made. And only you can be the judge of that based on the nature of the people you're interacting with and who you feel supported by and how that exchange is working with this new performance management model.
Great.
Any other questions?
Those are all the questions in the chat for now.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to a little bit more information. I want to go back to something for a moment here. Here, when we talked about do's and don'ts, I did mention some tips for interviewing via Zoom in our new remote platform, and as well as obviously when you are back in front of folks in person. But I want to open the door here for any other questions people might have around interviewing remotely. Does anybody have any questions about that? So one of the things I'd like to provide, if there's no questions, is a couple of tips. And one is that make sure your lighting, in addition to setting up your bar or your gallery next to your camera so that it looks like you're looking into the camera lens, make sure that you have decent lighting for yourself. Because sometimes I meet with people and it's not urgent for me to see their face in that particular situation. But if the interview panel is seeing you mostly as a silhouette because your lighting is all behind you instead of coming at you towards the front, it's not going to fare well in the way that they can evaluate you, because the way we communicate is so much nonverbal behavior. So even, for example, the way I'm sitting, I'm actually not seated against my back of my chair and haven't been the whole time. I've been seated upright and a little bit forward, which tells me and tells the other person I'm engaged, I'm eager to share information, I have an interest in the current exchange. Those kinds of nonverbal cues can be really helpful, and obviously seeing you well. There's something called a ring light. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. I learned about it shortly after we started doing our work via Zoom, and I started scheduling several training sessions for people about the Achieve Together performance review process. And my lighting wasn't very good in my office space, so I invested in a ring light. It's actually pretty simple. It's about $20, And it really helps. So you're able to see me much better now with using that. And in an interview situation, seeing some of those nonverbal cues is really helpful. And some of you probably can see me interacting a little bit with my hands, talking a little bit with my hands. That can be pretty valuable too. If you're really stoic the whole time, and your voice is stoic, as well as your, relaxed kind of back like this or something, you're not going to convey your best self in those situations. So all those kinds of things are just as valuable to think about via Zoom as they are in person. Obviously in person, you can't control the lighting of the room that they put you in, but you can if you're in your own home. Any other questions or thoughts or ideas around tips people have learned about Zoom use that they think would be helpful to your colleagues right now?
Kim, we had a suggestion from Wen, who said the setting in advance.
What's that?
And said test the setting.
Oh, yes. Yes, I love that idea. Test the setting in advance. Get on early with someone else. Set up a fake Zoom call with a friend. Ask how the whole environment looks. Those kinds of things. Very valuable ideas and tips to test your scenario.
So Michael's asking you, tie or no tie?
Oh, it sounds like such a simple thing, but I can say that it's come up almost every time I've ever done this, because when we're at Berkeley, we are in a pretty business casual oriented work environment, even when we're in the office. And people worry about showing up too formal as well as too casual. And I can tell you that if you're dressed in a nice shirt and a sport coat or something like that, you will probably be fine. You don't have to feel like you have to wear a tie. If your position is pretty high level, however, that tie might be valuable, because believe me, they know how to not go how to go without a tie, and they also know you got jeans in your closet. So you want to focus on, and I know this sounds funny too, but dress the whole part when you're interviewing. Don't dress pajama bottoms on the bottom and your blazer on the top. It's just not wise. If anything happened where you had to get up, it could be a joke in their eyes. It could be kind of funny, but it actually could also be a major deterrence. So my recommendation is dress the part. I've got my skirt on today. I don't have my pajama bottoms on today. So, you got to think about your audience and what you would do if you were present there with them. And the more you can do that, the better you're going to convey to them your eagerness and your interest in the job. These are great questions. Anything else?
Yeah, great questions, comments, and we have lots of thank yous to you, Kim. And this was
great. Thank you.
And I do want to say, yes, the recording will be shared, and I put the link to the website where the recording will be posted in a few days. So just check for that early next week. And Kim, I just want to thank you so very much for
you're welcome.
Sharing all these great examples and experiences and your wisdom. And I think everybody now is prepared to be the top candidate of choice.
Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I see a few familiar faces, which is actually kind of exciting for me, and some new ones as well. So thank you guys for joining the Now Encore series for job interviewing today. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. And I want to thank everybody who's here participating. Thanks for your engagement. And check out our upcoming workshops on the Grow Your Career page. And please fill out the evaluation just to give us some feedback on, what you loved, what could be better, and what else you'd like to see from us. So thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks again.